I'm 71 years old. I get $1,742 a month from Social Security. That is my entire income, not part of it, all of it. 2 years ago, I was sitting in a studio apartment in Phoenix, Arizona, eating a can of tuna over the sink because I couldn't afford both groceries and my electric bill in the same week. Today, I'm sitting on a balcony in Chiang Mai, Thailand, drinking coffee a woman named Nok brought up for me an hour ago, and I have $340 left over at the end of every month. Let me tell you how that happened. My name is Richard. I grew up in Bakersfield, California. My dad was a mechanic. My mom worked the register at a thrifty drugstore for 28 years. I was the oldest of four. We were not poor exactly, but we were the kind of family where new shoes were a Christmas present and my mother could stretch one chicken across three dinners. I learned how to work early. I had a paper route at 11. I bagged groceries at 15. I worked construction summers in high school. I graduated in 1972, didn't have the grades for college, and I got drafted about 6 months after graduation. Vietnam was winding down, but they still needed bodies. I did 14 months in country, came home with a bad knee, and a habit of not sleeping through the night. And I want to be clear, I'm not going to make this a war story. That's not what this is. But it matters because it earned me my VA care, and that turns out to be a piece of what saved me later. I got out in 1975 and I went to work. I spent 41 years driving a truck, not long haul, regional. I hauled produce out of the Central Valley to distribution centers all over California and Nevada. Same route most weeks, home most weekends. It was steady, and steady was what I wanted after the army, and I did that for 4 decades. I married Linda in 1979. She worked at an insurance agency doing billing. We had 2 kids, a son named Danny and a daughter named Michelle. We bought a small 3 bedroom in a subdivision outside Bakersfield in 1984 for $68,000, which sounds like nothing now, but was almost every dollar we had. Here's where the story goes off the rails, and I'm going to tell you the truth because there is no other way to tell it. I didn't save. I want to say that plainly. Not the way I should have. I contributed to Social Security because it came out of every check. But my company didn't offer a pension, and I never opened a 401k until I was in my late 40s, and even then, I only put in what my wife nagged me to put in, which was not enough. We paid the bills. We put both kids through community college and one of them through Cal State. We took a family vacation to Disneyland every other summer. We were what my dad would have called comfortable. Then Linda got sick. She was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's in 2011. She was 58. I want to skip past most of this because it's the part I still can't tell without stopping. She lived another 7 years. The last 3, she didn't know who I was for stretches at a time. Our insurance covered some of it, not most of it. Home care was $220 a day, and she needed it eventually 5 days a week. Memory care would have been $8,000 a month, and I could not do it. I could not put her in a place. I promised her before she stopped being able to hold a conversation that I would keep her home, and I did. I cashed out the 401k. I refinanced the house twice. I ran up $38,000 in credit card debt. When Linda died in the spring of 2018, I was 65 years old, working part-time as a driver for a produce co-op because I couldn't afford to fully retire. And I had almost nothing left except the house and the debt on it. I sold the house 6 months after the funeral. Bakersfield prices had gone up. I walked away with about 91,000 after paying off the second mortgage and the credit cards. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment closer to my daughter Michelle in Phoenix because she'd been calling every week and telling me to come. For 4 years, I stretched that 91,000. I want you to know I tried. I really tried. I ate cheap. I didn't run the air conditioning until it was 95 in the apartment. I drove a 2006 Toyota Corolla with 218,000 miles on it that I bought for $2,400 in cash. I didn't go out. I didn't have hobbies that cost money. I read books from the library, and it still ran out. By the fall of 2022, I was 69 years old. Social Security was paying me $1,742 a month. My rent was $1,280 for a studio in a not great part of Phoenix because the one bedroom near Michelle had gone up to $1,900. My car insurance was $140 a month. My phone was $70. Electric ran $300 and change in July and August because you cannot survive Phoenix in the summer without aircon. My supplemental insurance to fill the gaps Medicare didn't cover was $180 a month. You do the math on that. I had less than nothing left over. I was drawing down my savings account by $300 a month just to eat. I remember the exact night I understood I was in trouble. It was Tuesday in October of 2022. I opened the electric bill. It was $341. I sat on the edge of my bed and I looked at my checking account balance on my phone. And I did the math for what was left in my savings. And I realized I had maybe 14 months, 16 at the outside before I was out of money completely. And after that, it was just Social Security, $1,742 in Phoenix. I cannot describe to you the specific kind of quiet that settles into your chest when you understand that at 70 years old, you are going to be homeless. Not eventually, soon. And there is nobody left to catch you. My son Danny lives in Seattle and is barely making his own rent. My daughter Michelle has 2 teenagers and a husband whose hours got cut. I would not move in with her and be another mouth. She'd offered twice. I said no both times. I sat on that bed with the electric bill in my hand and I ate a can of tuna over the sink at 10 at night because I wasn't going to turn on the stove. And I want to tell you the thought I had because I'm not going to lie about it. I thought this is what the end of a life looks like. This is what happens when you didn't save enough and your wife got sick and the country you gave 14 months of your life to charges you $600 for a doctor's visit that costs $8 anywhere else. I sat there and I felt something I hadn't felt since Vietnam. Not fear. Something worse. I felt done. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark in that studio apartment until the sun came up over the Phoenix skyline. And when it did, I got up and made coffee and I opened my laptop for the first time in weeks, not to check email, but to type something into a search bar. I typed cheapest countries to retire on Social Security. I don't know what I expected. I think part of me expected to close the laptop and go back to bed. But the first article that came up had a list. Portugal, Mexico, Ecuador, Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines. Each one had a rough monthly cost. Every single number was less than what I was spending in Phoenix on rent alone. I read that article, then I read another, then I read 6 more. I sat at that little kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and I read for 4 straight hours, and something inside me that had been shut down for a long time started to wake up. I'd never been out of the country except for the army. I'd never had a passport as a civilian. I was 70 years old, alone, broke, and reading about places on the other side of the planet. I want you to understand how ridiculous this felt to me at the time. I closed the laptop that afternoon and I laughed out loud in an empty apartment. I actually laughed because the idea that I, Richard from Bakersfield, was going to move to Thailand was the most absurd thing I'd ever thought about. But I didn't stop reading. Over the next 2 months, I turned into somebody else. I started staying up until 2 in the morning watching YouTube videos. I found a channel run by a guy named Rikai who lived in the Philippines. I found another one about Chiang Mai in northern Thailand, run by a couple from Australia. I found a channel about Cuenca, Ecuador. I found forums. I found Facebook groups. I made a spreadsheet. This is the part that surprised even me. I hadn't opened Excel in probably 8 years, but I made a spreadsheet with columns for rent, food, health insurance, transportation, visa costs, and cost to fly there. I filled in numbers from real budgets that real expats had posted. I compared them against my $1,742. The Philippines came in around $1,100 a month comfortably. Ecuador around 1,300. Mexico depended on the city, but somewhere around 1,400. Portugal was tighter, 1,600 and change, and getting harder every year. Thailand kept coming up at around 1,200 a month for a nice life in Chiang Mai. Not scraping, not surviving, a nice life. Grocery money and a coffee habit and eating out and health insurance and rent and utilities and a little left over. $500 a month left over. On my social security. I stared at that spreadsheet for a long time. I called my son Danny first. I don't know why him and not Michelle. Maybe because he was farther away, or because he was the one who wouldn't cry. I told him what I was thinking. There was a long pause on the phone, and then he said, "Dad, you're 70. Are you sure?" I said, "Danny, I have 14 months of savings left. What am I sure about? What am I supposed to be sure about?" He got quiet again. Then he said something I did not expect. He said to me, "Dad, if you told me you were staying in Phoenix and eating tuna over the sink for the rest of your life, I would have been more worried than I am right now." I didn't know he knew about the tuna. He said, "Michelle told me you canceled your streaming service and stopped going to Denny's on Sundays." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Dad, go look, take a trip. Look with your own eyes. If it's not for you, come home, but look." Michelle was harder. I told her on a Saturday when I went over to her house for lunch. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I was done, she got up from the table and she went into the kitchen and she stood at the sink for a minute with her back to me. Then she came back and she sat down and she said, "Dad, is it because I couldn't help you more?" I want to tell you that moment almost broke me because that was exactly the wrong question. And it was the question I'd been terrified she would ask. I said, "Michelle, no, I did not save enough. That is not your fault. That is mine. And I'm not going to move in here and be another thing you have to take care of. Your mother would rise up out of the ground and slap me if I did that. You know she would." Michelle laughed a little through the tears. Because it was true. Linda would have. She said, "Dad, are you scared?" I said, "Every minute of every day. But I'm more scared of staying." She nodded. She said, "Then go look. But you promise me one thing. You promise me you talk to me every single week. I don't care what time zone you're in." I promised her. I applied for a passport that Monday. It cost me $130 and took 5 weeks. When it arrived in the mail, I sat down at the kitchen table and I held it in my hand. And I realized I had never owned a passport in my whole life. 70 years old, and I had never once had a document that let me leave my own country. I booked a scouting trip for February of 2023, 2 weeks. I chose Chiang Mai because everything I read said it was the easiest landing pad. The retirement visa was straightforward. The health care was excellent. The cost of living was the lowest I'd seen for that quality of life. And the expat community was large enough to help a first-timer figure things out. I flew out of Phoenix on a Wednesday morning. The ticket cost me $862 round trip with 2 layovers. Phoenix to LAX, LAX to Taipei, Taipei to Chiang Mai, 28 hours door to door. I sat in the middle seat on the Taipei to Chiang Mai leg. A woman on my right was Thai, maybe 60. She saw me struggling with my seatbelt because my hands were shaking a little. She reached over without asking and clicked it for me and then patted my arm. She said, "First time Thailand?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She smiled. She said, "You will like." I said, "I hope so." She said, "You will like." The plane landed at Chiang Mai International Airport at 9:40 in the evening. I walked off that plane onto a jet bridge that opened into an airport that was clean and quiet and lit softly. And I stood there in the arrivals hall at 70 years old, alone, with 2 suitcases and a passport I'd owned for 6 weeks. And I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt like I was doing something. For the first time in years, I was doing something, not just surviving something. I took a metered taxi to a small guest house called Sabai House in the Niman area, about 15 minutes from the airport. The fare was 160 baht, about $4.60. The driver spoke almost no English, but he knew my hotel, and he drove carefully. And when we pulled up, he got out and pulled both my suitcases to the front door for me and would not take a tip. The woman at the front desk was in her 30s. She looked up and smiled and said, "Kun Richard, welcome. Your room is ready. Would you like some water?" I said, "Yes, please." She poured me a small glass of cold water from a pitcher on the desk. She handed it to me. She said, "First time in Chiang Mai?" I said, "Yes." She said, "You are welcome here. Please sleep. Tomorrow we will show you where to eat." I went up to my room, small, clean, a ceiling fan, a window that opened onto a courtyard with a mango tree in it. I sat on the edge of the bed and I took off my shoes and I looked at my suitcase in the middle of the floor and I thought, I'm here. I am actually here. I did not sleep well that first night. It wasn't jet lag. It was that specific kind of awake you feel when your body knows something important is happening and it doesn't want to miss any of it. I woke up at 5 in the morning on my first full day and I could not stay in bed. I put on jeans and a t-shirt and I walked downstairs and out the front door of the guest house and into a city I had never seen in daylight. Chiang Mai at 5 in the morning is a specific kind of quiet. The air was cool, maybe 72 degrees, and there was mist coming off the concrete because the humidity was already high. A few vendors were setting up carts on the corner. A monk in orange robes was walking barefoot down the sidewalk with a metal bowl, and a woman in an apron came out of a house with a pot of rice and knelt down and put a spoonful into his bowl and pressed her hands together and bowed her head. He nodded and kept walking. She stood up and went back inside. I stood on that sidewalk and watched that whole exchange. And I did not know what I had just seen, but I knew it was the oldest thing I had ever witnessed in person. That was a thing that had been happening on this street, on some version of this street, for 700 years. And I had just watched it from 10 feet away. I walked for 2 hours. I didn't know where I was going. I walked past temples, what they call them, with gold roofs catching the first sun. I walked past a coffee cart set up on a corner where a young woman was already serving customers. I walked past a school where kids in matching blue uniforms were being dropped off by parents on scooters. I walked past a market where old women were setting up mangoes and papayas and something long and green I didn't recognize. I stopped at a small food cart on a side street where an older woman was cooking rice soup in a big pot. She saw me watching. She said something I didn't understand and pointed at the pot. I pointed at it and nodded and held up one finger. She grinned. She ladled rice soup into a bowl, cracked a raw egg into it that cooked in the heat of the broth, added chopped ginger and green onions and a few slices of pork, and handed it to me with a spoon. She held up her hand, 4 fingers, 40 baht, about $1.15. I sat on a little plastic stool at a plastic table next to her cart, and I ate that bowl of soup. And I want to tell you, it was one of the best things I have ever put in my mouth. Not because it was fancy, because it was warm and it was made 3 feet from where I sat by a woman who had been making it every morning for probably 30 years. When I was done, I stood up and I handed her a 50 baht note and I said, "Thank you." And I bowed my head a little the way I'd seen the woman do to the monk. The lady behind the cart laughed, a real laugh, and pressed her hands together and bowed back and said, "Kop kun ka, mister." She handed me my 10 baht in change. I walked back to the guest house and I sat on the little bench in the courtyard under the mango tree. And I thought, okay, something is happening to me. I don't know what it is yet, but something is happening. That first week I did the things you're supposed to do. I toured 2 apartment buildings. I visited 2 hospitals. I met with a visa agent. I sat down with 3 expats over coffee. I want to walk you through the actual numbers because that's the whole point of this story. And I promised myself when I started telling it I wouldn't skip the numbers. The first apartment I looked at was a studio in a building called Puna Residence in the Neiman area. Fully furnished, aircon, Wi-Fi, a pool downstairs and a small gym. 12,000 baht a month, about $340. The second was 1 bedroom, older building, less glamorous but bigger, in an area called Santitham, a 15-minute walk from the old city. 9,000 baht, about $260. Both of those places were bigger and nicer than my studio in Phoenix. Both of them included water. Both of them had aircon that actually worked. My electric bill, the manager at Pana told me, would run me somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 baht a month, depending on how much I ran the aircon, between $30 and $60. I stood on the balcony of that Puna studio, on the 12th floor, looking out at Doi Suthep, the mountain that sits west of Chiang Mai with a temple on top of it. And I did the math out loud. I said 12,000 baht for rent, 2,000 for electric. That's 14,000. $400 a month, all in for the roof over my head. I had been paying $1,280 for a studio in Phoenix, 3 times as much for a third of the quality. The manager, a woman named Kun Ploy, watched me do the math and she smiled a little. She said, "First time." I said, "Yes." She said, "It is different here." I said, "I can see that." I went to Bangkok Hospital, Chiang Mai on day 3. Wayne, the expat from Michigan I'd been emailing with before my trip, had told me to go and just walk in as a walk-in. I did. I told the receptionist I was visiting from America and I wanted to get a general checkup. She asked me one question, which was whether I had health insurance in Thailand. I said no, I would pay cash. She said, "That is fine, sir. Please have a seat." 14 minutes later, I was in an exam room. A doctor named Dr. Anong, a woman in her 40s, who had trained in Bangkok and Melbourne, sat with me for 35 minutes. She took my history. She asked about Linda and how I was sleeping. She asked about my knee. She ordered basic blood work. She took my blood pressure 4 different times because it kept coming down as I sat there. She told me my numbers, told me I needed to watch my sodium, told me my knee wasn't going to get better, but there were injections we could talk about if it started limiting me. The bill for the visit, the blood work, and everything they did was 2,800 baht, $80. I stood at the payment window and I stared at that receipt. I thought about the $2,200 bill I'd gotten in 2021 in Phoenix for a colonoscopy, which was a routine screening my supplemental didn't fully cover. I thought about the $600 ER visit I'd had in 2020 when I sprained my wrist falling off the porch. I thought about how Linda's last month of home care had cost me $9,000. I stood at that window and I felt something inside my chest that I want to name for you. It was rage. Quiet rage. The rage of a man who has just found out he has been paying 10 times too much for something his whole life and nobody ever told him he had a choice. I went to see the visa agent on day 4. Her office was small on the second floor above a coffee shop and her name was Kun Nan. She was maybe 40. Sharp, direct, no sales pitch. She told me the truth about the non-immigrant OA retirement visa. Age 50 and over. I qualified. I needed to have either 800,000 baht sitting in a Thai bank account, about $23,000, or I needed to prove monthly income of at least 65,000 baht, about $1,850. Or a combination adding up to 800,000 baht a year. My social security was $1,742. I was $108 short a month on the income route. I sat there in her office and my face fell and she saw it. She said, "Kun Richard, you can use a combination, some income, some savings. You can also apply for the non-immigrant O visa, which is easier to convert once you're here. Or you can put 400,000 baht in the bank and use the rest as income. There are options. Do not decide today." She sent me home with a folder of papers to read. She did not charge me for the meeting. I went back to the guest house and I sat on the bench under the mango tree and I did the math again. I had about $48,000 left in savings from the house sale. 800,000 baht was about 23,000. I could put that in a Thai bank as the visa deposit and still have 25,000 left over as a safety net. My social security would cover my monthly costs with room to spare. I would not run out of money. Not at 75, not at 80, not at 90. I sat under that mango tree and I put my hands over my face. I did not cry. I just sat there. Because the weight I had been carrying since Linda died had been so heavy for so long that when it finally came off my shoulders in the courtyard, I didn't know what to do with the space it left. That evening, I met an American expat named Wayne for dinner at a place called The Whole Earth. He was 72, a retired dentist from Grand Rapids, Michigan. He'd been in Chiang Mai for 8 years, widower. One grown son back in the States. He'd found me through the Facebook group I'd joined 3 months earlier, and he'd emailed me back in December and said, "When you get here, we're having dinner." Wayne was already at the table on the outdoor patio when I got there. He stood up when he saw me. Tall guy, gray ponytail khaki shirt. He shook my hand and gestured at the chair across from him. He said, "Richard, glad you made it." I said, "Glad to be made it." He grinned at that. He waved down a waitress and ordered 2 beers without asking me. Chang beer, 90 baht each, about $2.60. He waited until they arrived and we cleaned bottles and he took a long pull and then he set his down and he looked at me. He said, "All right, tell me the story, all of it. I want to know what brought you here." I told him the whole thing. Linda, the house, the dead, Phoenix, the tuna over the sink, the spreadsheet, the passport at 70. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he did not say anything for a while. He just sat there and looked at his beer. Then he said, "Richard, I want to tell you something and I want you to hear it. You're not the first man to sit across from me at this table with that story. You will not be the last. There are more of us here than you think." I said, "More Americans on Social Security." He said, "Americans, Canadians, Brits, Australians. Guys who did not save enough or who did save enough and then got wiped out by an illness or a divorce or bad advice. There are hundreds of us in this city, thousands in Thailand. You are not alone. You are not the fool you probably think you are for showing up here at 70 with your life in 2 suitcases." I did not know what to say. I looked at my beer. He said, "Can I ask you a hard question?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Have you been telling yourself this is your fault? The money situation, have you been carrying that?" I said, "I did not save enough. It is my fault." He said, "Richard, you drove a truck for 41 years. You raised 2 kids. You took care of a woman with Alzheimer's for 7 years and you kept her at home. You did not fail. The system failed you. There is a difference. And if you spend the next 15 years being angry at yourself, you're going to waste them. You have to put that down." He said it plain, not sentimental, like he was telling me to change my oil. I sat there in the Chiang Mai evening with a fan turning overhead and a small dog sleeping under the next table, and I thought about what he'd just said. I did not agree with all of it. I still think I could have saved more. But something in me let go a small amount right there at the table that I had been holding for 6 years. We talked for 3 more hours. Wayne walked me through his monthly budget. He was living on $1,380 a month, everything included. Rent, electric, water, phone, internet, food, health insurance, transportation, entertainment. He said he could live on less if he had to, but he liked to eat out 4 nights a week and he had a housekeeper come twice a month. So he splurged. He told me his health insurance. He had a policy with a Thai company called Pacific Cross that cost him about $1,800 a year and covered him for anything short of the very biggest catastrophic stuff. He said for the really big things he had a plan B, which was flying to Bangkok, where the top hospitals will negotiate cash prices with expats that are still cheaper than the American system. He walked me through the food. He said his grocery bill for the month ran about $80 because he ate at home for breakfast and had fruit around the house, but almost every other meal was at a food cart or a small restaurant. A full dinner at a nice place ran 250 baht, about $7. Street food was 50 to 80 baht a meal. He said he had not once in 8 years spent more than $30 on a dinner in Chiang Mai. He told me about the community. He said, "Richard, the mistake newcomers make is they show up here and they find the wrong expats. They find the guys sitting on bar stools at 11 in the morning complaining about how nothing works right. Those guys exist here. They exist in every expat town. Do not sit with them. There are Rotary clubs, book clubs, hiking groups, meditation groups at the temples, English tutoring for Thai kids, a whole volunteer scene at the schools. If you want a life here, you can build one. If you want to sit on a bar stool, you can do that too. And you will be dead inside a year. He walked me back toward my guest house at 10:30 at night. Chiang Mai streets were full of people, tourists and locals and families and monks, food carts still serving, string lights over the sidewalks. I felt safe. My shoulders were down. I hadn't checked behind me once in 6 hours. At the corner where we split, Wayne turned to me and he said, "Give it the whole 2 weeks. Do not decide anything until day 12. Do you hear me?" I said, "I hear you." He said, "One more thing. If you decide to come, do not sign a lease longer than 3 months on your first place. I made that mistake. You will regret it if you do." I said I would remember. I walked the rest of the way to the guest house under those string lights, past a monk closing the door of a small wharf for the night, and I thought about the electric bill in Phoenix and the tuna and the studio and the 218,000-mile Corolla. And I thought, I do not know what is going to happen, but something is different in my chest tonight than it was when I got on that plane. The rest of that first trip was me becoming a person again. That is the best way I know how to say it. I ate breakfast at the same rice soup cart every morning. By day 4, the woman was pouring my bowl before I got to her stall. She never asked my name. She just called me Papa. She would say, "Papa, you eat," and hand me the bowl. I found a coffee shop called Graf in the Neiman area. Small place, espresso bar. The owner was a young Thai man named Boat who spoke English better than I did. He asked me what I liked. I said black coffee. He said, "Try the pour over from Doi Chang. It is grown 2 hours from here. I promise you will like it." I did. He was right. I went back the next day and he had it ready. I went to Doi Suthep with Wayne on day 9. He drove me up in his old pickup, 306 steps to the top of the temple grounds. I took my time and stopped once, and Wayne stopped with me and did not make a joke about it. At the top, standing on the terrace looking out over the whole city as the afternoon light turned everything gold, Wayne said, "You know, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I think I know." He said, "You want to tell me?" I said, "I want to move here. I want to try. I do not want to go back to Phoenix and eat tuna over the sink." He said, "Then that is what you're going to do. Take your time. Do it right. But you know." The hard call was Michelle. I called her from the guest house on day 11. It was 10 in the morning her time. She picked up on the first ring. She said, "Dad, are you okay?" I said, "Michelle, I am okay. I am better than okay. I have to tell you something." She said, "Oh no." I said, "I want to move here. I want to do this. I have the numbers. I have talked to a visa agent. I have looked at apartments. I have been to a hospital. I have a friend here who has been here 8 years and is going to help me. Michelle, I can do this on my social security. I can live here well on my social security. I did the math 4 different ways and it works." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad." I said, "Michelle." She said, "You are 70 years old and you are moving to Thailand." I said, "I am 70 years old and I'm moving to Thailand." She said, "Do you know how far away that is?" I said, "Yes, I know." She was quiet again. Then she started to cry, and I started to cry, and neither of us said anything for a minute. Then she said, "Dad, I do not want to lose you." I said, Michelle, you're not losing me. You would have lost me in Phoenix. I want you to hear that. You would have lost me in Phoenix. I could not do it anymore. I was breaking. This is me not breaking. Do you understand? She said, I don't know if I do. I said, come see me. When I'm set up, come see me and you will. She said, okay, Dad. Okay. I flew home 3 days later. I walked into that studio in Phoenix and I did not sit down. I did not take my coat off. I stood in the middle of the room and I looked at it and I said out loud to nobody, I am not living here anymore. I gave notice to the landlord the next morning. I sold the Corolla for $1,100 to a guy Michelle knew. I sold the furniture on Facebook Marketplace for $340 total. I gave away my clothes except for what fit in 2 suitcases. I kept photos, Linda's wedding ring, a small box of letters, my dad's watch. Everything else went. Michelle helped me pack the last weekend. She did not cry until the very end, when we were standing at the door of the empty studio and she was looking around at what 40 years of her life had come down to. She said, Dad, this is really happening. I said, it is really happening. She hugged me for a long time. Then she pulled back and looked at me and she said, Dad, if you're not okay over there, if it does not work, you call me. You call me and I will figure out how to get you home. I said I would. I flew out of Phoenix on a Monday morning in April. I landed in Chiang Mai 29 hours later. Wayne picked me up at the airport in his old pickup. He carried one of my suitcases to the truck for me because my knee was stiff from the flight. He drove me to a small apartment I had rented sight unseen through him in St. Titan, 1 bedroom, older building, nothing fancy, 9,500 baht a month, about $270. He handed me the keys at the front door. He said, welcome home. I stood in that empty apartment with my 2 suitcases at my feet and I set them down and I looked around at the ceiling fan and the small kitchen and the window that opened onto a courtyard where I could hear a rooster somewhere. And I thought, all right, this is it. This is the rest of my life. And I did not feel scared. For the first time in 6 years, I did not feel scared. The first 3 months were the shape of a new life taking hold in me, the way a plant takes to new soil. Slow, a little unsteady, real. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, a kitchen you could stand in the middle of and touch both counters, a bathroom with a shower that had 2 settings, warm and slightly warmer, and a balcony 6 feet wide that looked out at the neighbor's mango tree, and past that, the roof of a small wat 2 blocks over. I could hear the monks chanting some mornings if the wind was right. That is not something I ever thought I would type in my life. I can hear monks from my apartment. I bought a used scooter in my 2nd week. Wayne went with me. It was a Honda Click, 4 years old, 28,000 kilometers on it, 22,000 baht, about $630. I had not been on 2 wheels since I was a teenager, and I want to tell you I was terrified. Wayne rode with me on his own scooter for the first 10 days, slow, side streets, teaching me how the traffic flows here, which is not chaotic once you understand the rhythm, but takes some getting used to. I got my Thai driver's license in my 4th week, 90 minutes, a color blindness test, a reflex test, 300 baht, about $9. In Phoenix, my last license renewal had cost me $25 and taken most of a day at the DMV. I want to walk you through what a month actually looked like in that first year. Because if you are sitting where I was sitting 18 months before, in a studio in Phoenix or Cleveland or Jacksonville with a tuna can and an electric bill. The numbers are the whole point. Rent 9,500 baht, $270. Electric, running the aircon at night and a fan during the day, about 1,800 baht, $52. Water and internet, 600 baht combined, $17. Phone, a Thai SIM card with unlimited data, 300 baht, $9. Groceries at the local market for fruit, eggs, coffee, some rice, maybe 2,000 baht for the month. $57. Eating out, which I did for at least one meal every day and sometimes two, maybe 5,000 baht a month, about $145. That was $7 average dinners at nice sit-down places and 150 average lunches at food carts. Transportation, gas for the scooter, about 400 baht a month. $12. Health insurance with Pacific Cross, similar to what Wayne had, about 17,000 baht a year, which came out to 1,400 a month. $40. Miscellaneous, haircuts at 80 baht each. Laundry with Kun Mali down the street at 140 baht a week. Coffee at boat shop 3 or 4 mornings a week, maybe 2,000 baht a month for everything. $57. Add that all up. 22,000 baht a month, roughly. $660. My social security was $1,742. Every month, I had $1,082 left over. I opened a savings account at Bangkok Bank that I had set up when I opened the 800,000 baht deposit for the visa. Every month, I move $1,000 into it. Not because I was going to spend it. Because for the first time since Linda got sick, I was going to have savings again. Real savings. Growing, not shrinking. I want to say that plainly. I am 71 years old and every month I save more money than I did in most of the years I was working 40 hours a week driving a truck. That is not because Thailand is a get-rich scheme. That is because the American cost of living is broken, and if you have social security and you are willing to move, you can live like a human being again. But the money is not the point. The money is what makes the rest of it possible. Let me tell you about the rest of it. My coffee shop is Graf. Both. The owner learned my order in week 2. He now has it ready when I come through the door. A pour over from Doi Chang and a small piece of banana bread. 120 baht. About $3.45. I sit there most mornings for an hour and read a book and watch the street. Both and I have talked about his mother's health, about American politics, which he understands better than most Americans I know, about a woman he wants to marry and cannot afford to marry yet, and about coffee, which is his whole life. He's 34 years old and he's one of the best friends I have in this country. My laundry lady is Kun Mali, and I already told you about her. She started calling me Papa Richard in month 2. Her daughter, whose name is Fern, is 29 and a school teacher, and she comes by the laundry 3 afternoons a week to help her mother. Fern asked me if I would be willing to sit with her English club at the school once a month and just talk with the kids. Nothing formal, just a native speaker they could ask questions to. I said yes. I have been doing it every month for over a year now. There are 14 kids in the club, ages 9 through 12, and they call me Papa Richard. 2. Now because Fern started it and it stuck. My neighbors are Ploy and Michael. Same names as the couple I told you about in another story. And it is a common Thai name and a common Australian one, and I'm going to leave it. They are in their 60s, both retired teachers. She is Thai and he is Australian. They have been married for 18 years. She knocked on my door in my third week with a container of green curry and rice. Michael came by 2 days later to check the aircon in my bedroom because Ploy had told him I said it was making a noise. He fixed it in 10 minutes. He would not let me pay him. I have dinner with them every other Wednesday. I bring wine. Ploy cooks. Michael talks about Australian football, which I understand nothing about. And we drink and we laugh, and I walk back across the hall at 9 at night, and I get into bed in a small apartment in northern Thailand, and I think, this is a life. This is a real life. I did not have a life like this in Bakersfield when I was 50. I have one now at 71 on Social Security. I want to tell you about the medical scare, because there was one. And it is the part of this story I would have been most afraid of before I left Phoenix. It was August of last year, about 5 months after I moved. I was walking back from the market with a bag of oranges, and I felt something in my chest. Heavy, not sharp. My left arm felt strange. I sat down on a low wall outside a shop and I tried to breathe slow. The shop owner, an older woman I did not know, saw me sitting there and came out. She took one look at my face and she went back inside and came out with a bottle of water, and then she was on her phone talking fast. 2 minutes later, a Grab car pulled up. She had called it for me. She helped me into the back seat, said something to the driver, and off we went. She would not accept money for the water or for calling. Bangkok Hospital took me in immediately. EKG in 12 minutes, blood work. A cardiologist named Dr. Kittipong saw me within 25 minutes. Warm, careful, thorough. He explained everything. It was not a heart attack. It was a stress episode combined with mild dehydration and possibly the beginning of a sinus infection that had my blood pressure spiking. He wanted me to stay for observation and a stress test. I stayed 6 hours. They ran everything. When I walked out of that hospital, my total bill for the emergency visit, the EKG, the blood panel, the stress test, and 6 hours of observation with a cardiologist checking on me twice was 14,600 baht, $418. My insurance covered 80% of it. My out-of-pocket was $84. I sat in the Grab on the way home, and I thought about what that would have been in Phoenix. $12,000, easy, maybe 15, and I would have been arguing with Medicare and my supplemental for 6 months about the pieces they did not cover. Instead, I paid $84 and went home to my apartment and made tea and called Michelle. I told her the whole thing. I told her the bill. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, send me a picture of the receipt." I did. She called back an hour later. She had been crying. She said, "Dad, I have been so scared for you over there about the health stuff. That is what scares me the most. And you just went to a real hospital and got treated by a real doctor, and it cost you $84. I said, "Michelle, it cost me $84. She said, "Dad, when can I come see you?" She came in November. She could only stay 6 days because of work, and she flew alone because Alex, her husband, had to stay with the kids. She landed at Chiang Mai International at 11 at night, and I picked her up on the scooter, which she refused to ride, so we took a Grab back to my apartment. She stayed with me the whole time. I made up the couch. She slept there like a college kid. I did not try to sell Thailand to her. I let her see it. I took her to Graf. Both shook her hand and said, "Your father is a good customer. He has excellent taste in beans. Michelle laughed. I took her to Ploy and Michael's for dinner. Ploy hugged her the second she walked in the door and said, "Your papa is our family now. So you are family too." Michelle got a little wet in the eyes and Ploy pretended not to see. I took her to the rice soup cart in the morning. The lady behind the cart saw Michelle and pointed at her and pointed at me and said, "Your daughter?" I said, "Yes." She grinned so big I thought her face would break, and she made Michelle a bowl and would not let her pay for it. I took her up to Doi Suthep on day 4, same 306 steps. Michelle went slow with me because of my knee. At the top, standing on the terrace looking out over the city as the light went gold, she said, "Dad." I said, "Yeah, Michelle." She said, "I was so scared for you when you left. I need you to know that. I told Alex you were going to die in Thailand alone in an apartment and nobody would find you for weeks." I said, "I know you thought that. It is okay." She said, "Dad, you are healthier than you were when you left. You look 10 years younger. Your voice sounds different. You're laughing again. I have not seen you laugh in 6 years." I did not say anything. I could not. She said, "Mom would have loved this place." I said, "Yeah, sweetheart, she would have." She said, "I am sorry for the brochures. I never showed them to you, but I had them. I had a folder for you in my kitchen. Alex and I were going to sit you down after Christmas. I'm glad you got on that plane before we did that." I did not know she had a folder. I had not known that. I stood there at the top of Doi Suthep next to my daughter and I understood how close I had come. How close I had come to letting them do to me what I had watched other families do to their fathers. Not out of cruelty, out of love and fear, but close all the same. We stood there for a long time and did not say anything else. The bells at the temple started ringing behind us. A dog barked somewhere far away. The sun kept going down. Michelle flew home 4 days later. At the Chiang Mai airport, she hugged me for a long time. She pulled back and looked at me with those wet eyes she guessed from her mother, and she said, "Dad, I am going to bring the boys next summer. Both of them. Alex too." I said, "You promise?" She said, "I promise. And I want you to come home for Christmas. I will pay for the ticket." I said, "Michelle, I can pay for my own ticket now." She said, "I know you can, Dad, but I want to." I let her. It felt good to let her. It felt like the way it is supposed to be between a grown child and a parent who's doing okay. Not a rescue, just a Christmas ticket. She went through security and turned around at the last minute and waved. I waved back. I stood there in that little airport for a few minutes after she was out of sight, and I thought about the woman who had raised her, Linda. And I thought about the woman Michelle had become. And I thought Linda would be proud of both of us. I really do. I went home Christmas of last year. 10 days in Phoenix with Michelle and Alex and my grandsons, Ethan, who's 13, and Tyler, who's 9. I stayed in the guest room. Danny flew down from Seattle for 4 days. The boys wanted to know everything about Thailand. Tyler asked me if there were tigers. I told him there used to be, but not anymore in the north. He was disappointed. I promised him we would go to the elephant sanctuary if he came to visit. Being back in Phoenix was strange. I noticed it the second I walked out of Sky Harbor. Everything was too big, too spread out, too expensive. I went with Michelle to a grocery store on my second day, and I could not stop doing the math out loud. carton of eggs was $5. A pound of ground beef was $6.50. A gallon of milk was $4.80. I had been paying $2 for a full plate of pad kra pao at a food cart 3 blocks from my apartment 2 weeks before. Michelle laughed at me and said, "Dad, you are that guy now. You are the guy who lives abroad and comes home and can't stop talking about the prices." I said, "Michelle, I cannot help it. It is insane. How does anybody eat?" She said, "They don't. That is the answer, Dad. A lot of them don't. That is why I have been so worried about you all these years." I stayed the 10 days. It was good to be with the boys. It was good to hug Michelle in her own kitchen. It was good to sit on the couch with Danny and watch a football game with a beer, the way we used to. But by day 7, I was ready to go home. And I used that word carefully. Home. It meant Chiang Mai now. Not Phoenix, not Bakersfield, Chiang Mai. I flew back on New Year's Eve. Wayne picked me up at the airport. He drove me back to my apartment through streets that were quiet. In a way, American streets are never quiet. Just before midnight, I stood on my little balcony and watched a few small fireworks go up somewhere over the old city. And I could hear people cheering faintly, and I thought, I am home. I am 71 years old. I retired on Social Security alone. And I am home. I am going to give you the honest present tense now, because it is what I would have wanted somebody to give me 2 years ago when I was reading spreadsheets at midnight in a Phoenix studio. I get up around 6 most mornings. I make coffee. Boat has ruined me on cheap coffee, so I grind beans I buy from him for 240 baht a bag, about $7. That lasts me almost 3 weeks. I sit on my balcony and I drink it and I watch the neighborhood wake up. Around 7, I walk to the rice soup cart. "Papa, Papa," she says. And I sit and eat and hand her 40 baht and thank her and walk back. I meet Wayne 2 mornings a week at Graf. We drink pour-overs and we talk about nothing important. He's teaching me a little Thai. I am slow at it. He does not care. I tutor the English club at Fern's school one afternoon a month. Those kids ask me about America. They ask about snow. They ask about football, meaning the real football, which is soccer to me. And I have to explain that Americans do not really play soccer, and they cannot believe it. One of the girls, a 9-year-old named Braib, told me last month that she wants to be a doctor and go to America. I told her, be a doctor and go anywhere she wants, and she can come see me in Chiang Mai on her way. I have dinner with Ploy and Michael every other Wednesday. I have coffee with Wayne. I get my laundry done by Kun Malay. I read library books I borrow through an app on my phone. I take my scooter on Saturdays to a market on the edge of town where the produce is even cheaper than in the city, and the vendors know me now. I go to Doi Suthep every couple of months on a clear day. My knee is better than it was in Phoenix. Walking every day and losing 17 pounds will do that. My blood pressure came down 22 points in the first year. Dr. Anong at Bangkok Hospital measures it every 6 months and grins at me and says, "Kun Richard, you are doing everything right." I do not have a girlfriend. I am not looking for one. I want to be honest about that because I know that is a part of these stories that a lot of guys pay attention to. Linda was my whole life for 39 years and I'm not ready and I may never be ready. And that is fine. I have friends. I have neighbors who call me family. I have a daughter who is coming back this summer with her whole family. And a son who's talking about a 2-week visit in the fall. I miss Linda every day. That does not go away. But I do not carry her ghost around this apartment the way I carried it around the studio in Phoenix. I think she would be glad about that. She was a practical woman. She would have hated to see me eating tuna over a sink because I was too proud to move somewhere I could afford. She would have said, Richard, get on the plane, you old fool. Go live. I want to say something before we finish, and it is the whole reason I made myself sit down and tell this story instead of just living it. If you are sitting in an apartment tonight, or in a studio, or in a room in a family member's house, and you are looking at your social security number and doing math with a calculator and thinking your life is over, I want you to hear me. Your life is not over. You have options you have not considered. Not because Thailand is a fairy tale, it is not. There are things I miss about America. There are things about Thailand that would drive you crazy: the heat, the paperwork, the burning season in March when the air quality gets bad and you have to run air purifiers. This is not paradise. It is just a place where the numbers work. There are other places too: Mexico, Ecuador, Portugal, which is getting harder, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia. There are ways to live well on Social Security alone if you are willing to leave the country you have always lived in. Nobody teaches this in America. Nobody at Social Security tells you when you sign up that you're allowed to leave. But you are. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to be 70 years old and get on a plane and see what else is out there. I want to mention one thing that would have saved me a lot of stumbling. There is a book called The Honest Move that walks through the real numbers. The cities compared side by side, the visa systems, how healthcare actually works in each country, and the traps that catch people in their first year overseas. I did not have it. I put a lot of the information together the hard way, from Facebook groups at 2 in the morning and strangers who were kind enough to answer my emails. If you are seriously thinking about a move like this, whether it is Thailand or the Philippines or Mexico or Portugal or anywhere else, that book covers the stuff nobody in America tells you. There is a link in the description if you want to check it out. No pressure. I am just mentioning it because it would have saved me months of stumbling. If this story meant something to you, or if you know somebody sitting somewhere tonight with a can of tuna and an electric bill and a calculator, I would appreciate it if you would hit the like button and subscribe. I have more stories coming, real stories from real people, not fairy tales. Thanks for listening. My name is Richard. I retired on Social Security alone. I moved to Thailand at 70 years old with 2 suitcases and a passport I had owned for 6 weeks. And it is the best decision I have made since I asked Linda to marry me 46 years ago. I will see you in the next one.